Well, welcome everybody to the second day of United Days. Our theme for these past 2 days has been Spirit and Struggle, Acting Toward a Shareable World. And the title and the theme comes from two great thinkers of the 20th century and people who acted on their thinking. Rosemary Freeney Harding, who was married to Vincent Harding, two civil rights activists. Rosemary Freeney Harding and Vincent were Mennonite missionaries of a certain sort. They ran a house in Atlanta, Georgia called Mennonite House, and it was a place of hospitality, of welcome. It was one of the first multiracial ministries in the United States. And the second person was Toni Morrison, who spoke of a shareable world in the context of her reflections on home in a book that she wrote called The Source of Self-Regard. And she said that, this is a quote from that text, "It is a virtual question because this is the question of what do we mean when we say home? What is home?" She says, it is a virtual question because the destiny of the 21st century will be shaped by the possibility or the collapse of a shareable world. So both Toni Morrison and Rosemary Freeney Harding had a very capacious understanding of home, the sharing of one's home, the possibility that the world as a home can indeed be shared. And they had what we might call a theology of abundance. We reflected a bit on this yesterday in Uprising Theology, the workshop that Reverend Rasmussen and Dr. Levad led us through. If you weren't able to be there present for that yesterday, I encourage you to look it up on the YouTube channel, on United's YouTube channel. A really wonderful workshop that they did that reflected on abundance and discerning abundance in our lives, but then also abundance as the ground for a vision of a shareable world. And before I introduce our speakers this morning, I wanted to read something that came to mind this morning by Rosemary Freeney Harding and her daughter Rachel. And this, I think, gets at kind of the heart of what we're reflecting on over the last 2 days, and I think might introduce your talk this morning as well. So this is from a book called Remnants, a memoir of spirit, activism, and mothering, a book I highly recommend. It's written by Rosemary Freeney Harding and her daughter Rachel. So this is the poem or a prayer. We can call it an opening prayer. There is no scarcity. There is no shortage. No lack of love, of compassion, of joy in the world. There is enough. There is more than enough. Only fear and greed make us think otherwise. No one need starve. There is enough land and enough food. No one need die of thirst. There is enough water. No one need live without mercy. There is no end to grace. And we are all instruments of grace. The more we give it, the more we share it. The more we use it, the more God makes. There is no scarcity of love. There is plenty and always more. speakers this morning are Nikki McComb and Dr. Mike Klein. Nikki McComb, an artist and owner of Art Is My Weapon, has been working in North Minneapolis to promote youth and family achievement for more than 20 years. Her 2016 public safety campaign, #Enough, used art as a catalyst for change and social disruption. Through Art Is My Weapon, local artists use decommissioned guns to create art displays that engage the public, community leaders, and elected officials in respectful conversations about reducing gun violence. McComb's photos and videos offer communities an outlet where they feel safe enough to seek help, empowered enough to give help, provoked enough to work harder to unify, and unified enough to collectively make change. Welcome, Nikki. Dr. Mike Klein is an associate professor of Justice and Peace Studies and department chair of Justice and Society Studies at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. His research, writing, and consulting focuses on democratizing leadership, critical pedagogy, peace building in the arts, intersectionality, and racial justice. Mike is also a public artist working in sculpture, murals, and photography that address pressing social issues. Klein was a 2007 Bush Foundation Fellow, completed the James P. Shannon Leadership Institute in 2011, and is an inaugural member of the Washington National Cathedral's Sacred Spaces, Racial Justice, and Spirituality in Action. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
How about since the frog has taken over, I'll start us off and then I'll hand it back over to you, right? So we want to thank you very much for coming today. It's a beautiful morning. There are lots of other places you could have been and you chose to be here. So thanks for being here with us. We're excited to be able to talk about this, and in the light of Rye's very generous introductions, that idea of a scarcity mindset that we're trying to set aside, this abundance that we want to embrace. I hope that's a part of this, even as we're talking about a very difficult and pressing social issue around gun violence, right? That we have this very difficult time that we're dealing with, and we have this very creative approach that we're trying to use to address it. So I'm thrilled to be here alongside Nikki McComb, and I think we're gonna start with a little art activity. We want to get you involved with doing a little art instead of just listening. So I hope at 9, 10 in the morning, you're willing to take a little risk and step forward. I'm going to describe that briefly and then pass out some supplies while Nikki talks about what Art Is My Weapon is, where it came from, and gives you a little more sense about it. And one of the reasons that we're doing it this way is because when I've done this presentation in the past and left the art supplies out, it was a little triggering. And I mean the pun of that, right? We're talking about guns, and some of the objects that we use and some of the themes that we get into are very difficult. For many of us, violence is present in our lives, and we've been affected by these issues. So we try to be a little careful about how we step into this space. I'm going to pass around 38 caliber shells, and I'm going to pass around some little pieces of wire. And I'm going to invite you to do a little creation, if my clicker will work. There we go. So, no, go back. Oh, too far. There it is. So one of the ways that I've been responding to this project is by making little insects out of those shells and with wire. And I'm going to invite you to make your own version of this, right? To take a piece or two of wire and a shell and just start twisting into wings and legs and stingers and whatever comes out of your imagination in the moment. And we'll explain more about why we're doing this art project and how it'll move from here as we get into the presentation. So I'm going to start passing around. If you don't want to take one, if this isn't your thing this morning, you can simply put up your hand or smile and not put out your hands. And I'll move on, right? But as I pass these out, I'm going to offer the floor back to Nikki so that she can talk more about Art is My Weapon.
Thanks. Do I need this? Do I really? I do need it, because now I feel fancy. So, Art is My Weapon, as it says up there, is a 501c3 that was established. I used to work in a place called Pillsbury United Communities, if you've ever heard of it. And at the time, it was led by one of my very good friends, Shonda Smith Baker. And while I was there, Shonda had gone to the Ascend Institute and met a gentleman named Jonathan Ferrara. And Jonathan Ferrara is an artist out of New Orleans who created a concept called Guns in the Hands of Artists. And so he brought the exhibit to Ascend, and she saw it, and when she came home, she told me she wanted to bring the exhibit to Minneapolis. So I was like, okay, what are we gonna do? So we brought the exhibit. It was very profound, and in 2011, Shonda had lost her cousin to gun violence, and so she was very moved by the exhibit and said, I want to do my own. I want to create something here. I want to model this here. And because I'm an artist and because we were friends, she was like, and you're going to do it. And I was like, okay. So we came up with the title. Technically, well, she chose the title, and we worked diligently to produce a gun buyback that got about, I think it was about 150 weapons off the street. They were decommissioned down into about 500 or so different pieces. And that's how I actually met Mike, because he came, got some pieces, and created some artwork for the exhibit. And many other artists did the same. Shonda moved on in her career into another position. I also moved on from Pillsbury, but I was not willing to stop the work that Art is My Weapon had started. And so I went to Shonda and the interim CEO and asked if I could take ownership of the organization, and they said yes. So since then, since 2016, 17, I have had full ownership. Shonda is an ex officio board member. In between there was a shooting that happened very, very near one of the locations that I worked out of, which is right on Penn Avenue in Oak Park. It's called Oak Park Center. And I was leaving work, and I saw all this commotion, and I saw all these cars, and I saw, people crying and screaming, and I'm just leaving work. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And so I just go through, and I get home, and then I get a call from a friend saying that somebody that I know, their mother was murdered on the corner in gang crossfire. And her daughter was in the back seat. So she was this is the woman's granddaughter in the back seat. And I was so mad. I was so angry. And I just could not think of any other way to do something other than using art as a catalyst. So I began to take photographs of people, first her, the daughter of this grandmother, asking community to come forward or give information or whatever. And so one of the photos, which I don't think is even accessible right now, was her very close up holding a sign up that said, "That was my mother." And so I put put it online on my Facebook. I created this page, and all of a sudden, people started messaging her on her Facebook and saying, I know something. I know what happened. I know who's involved. I know this, that, or the other. And so she called me and she said, what do I do? I said, call the investigator. So all of these messages and the photo being circulated, the people were basically saying, I saw your picture, I'm so sorry, but this is what I know. So shortly thereafter, well, not shortly thereafter, about a year later, after the rest of the tips came in and so on and so forth, the suspect was apprehended. So I started getting calls from other people and other families, and I started taking photos of them and spreading them around and you know, hoping for people to come forward. So that was one part of the work that started. The second part was doing the work, the artwork, and the exhibitions, and making sure that people understand there's a whole lot that happens when one person is shot. There's a whole lot of people connected to it. More than one person is losing everything. The shooter, the family, the shooter's family, the victim's family, the victim. There's tons of people involved in just one shooting. And so I started doing other photographs similar to the one you see up there that kind of told different stories around how people are disproportionately affected by gun violence, primarily people of color. And so I would put my work in the exhibits as well. And then I tumbled into serving victims and their family members, and family members of victims who no longer are here. And then I tumbled into serving young people to prevent them from either being involved in a crime or going back to commit another crime. Or so I'm working with Hennepin County Corrections and the probation officers and Minneapolis Public Schools and so on and so forth. And so this will be a good time for maybe the video to come up, just to give a little bit of some of the programming that I do in schools with young people and families. Oh, it's us. Hi.
According to gunviolencearchive.org, more than 25,000 people were killed in gun violence so far in 2023. More than half of all gun violence deaths this year were deaths by suicide. There have been 131 mass shootings with 4 or more people wounded or killed so far in 2023. Violence is a learned behavior. Children are not born violent. Art is My Weapon is invested in community violence intervention and prevention using art as a catalyst for change. The Healing Hearts program can help your students, families, and professionals promote ways to cope, express themselves, and prevent violence. Visit artismyweapon.org to learn more.
This was the things that make you release, and what makes me release is I like looking at the sky, and I like dancing, and I like hearing the rain when it's raining outside.
It was fun. It was, I liked that I was able to get out the house and I was able to go do something with that besides going outside or walking around,
It was positive, and it took me to a different place in my mind where I don't normally express things.
I work with participants by creating space. A lot of people go through depression and anxiety. They have feelings of sadness and anger. And I think it's really important to channel that through art. I really got into art just by dealing with a lot of mental health issues that I had on my own, really struggling with communication and expressing myself. For me, this is home.
So I just have to tell a tiny little story. That the woman that was talking at the end her name is Crystal. She's one of the instructors in the Healing Hearts program. But if you notice that little girl that kept, this was the kindest, sweetest little girl in the world, and she was so like, "How do you feel?" "I feel good right now." And when we left, she came up to me and she said, "I will never forget your name. I love you, Miss Nikki." It was so sweet. So every time I see the video, I'm like, "Aw." Anyway, so the last exhibit that we had was the one that you see there. I also have a solo exhibition up at the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum that is called Full Circle. It covers the entire aspect of folks involved in a shooting, from the shooter to the medical professionals to the victims to the conceal and carry instructor. So if you ever make your way over that way, check it out. What else, Mike?
Well, part of what we wanted to talk about today is this story, right? And the difficulty, the pressing social issue of gun violence, but also about the way that art creates a different way forward. When we hear the news and we feel deeply the tragedy of this, or we get desensitized over time because it seems to be so recurrent and so common, art tends to interrupt some of those patterns of thought, right? Making things, even the work you're doing with your hands right now, activates different parts of the brain, creates space for new things to happen. And that's been very tangible and practical in terms of Nikki's work and in terms of this organization. One of the first shows that I became involved with in North Minneapolis at Homewood Studios, you were brilliant at inviting people into that space who probably wouldn't encounter each other otherwise. Mayor Fry and Chief Arredondo at the time were there. There were victims and survivors and families there. There were gun rights advocates, and there were gun restriction advocates in the space. There were all generations and all kinds of intersectional identities represented. And that art exhibit creates the opportunity to encounter each other. And what I think I see often in the examples, and even in the class that I've just done, we've talked about that in a moment too, it's people who may not talk directly to each other, but by talking about the art, by having this third thing in the conversation, they can say, "What do you think about that?" And the person can say, "I think that represents." And instead of having to encounter each other directly, the art mediates the conversation. And it creates just enough distance to be able to say hard things at the art without saying hard things at each other, right? And so we open up a space for people to really listen, to engage, to be able to work through some of maybe the thoughts, the feelings, the things that we have trouble expressing. So the expression isn't just in the making of the art, although that's very powerful, but it's also in the encounter through the art with each other, right? And that's a part of what we're trying to encourage and kind of open ourselves up to not just policy issues, not just the latest news, not just the latest tragedy, but imagining new ways forward.
I want to say one thing, and I'm you probably can tell by how I've presented, but I'm a very in-your-face person, in case you didn't know. And so I'm constantly inviting those folks to the table. I think there's been 12, maybe 11 exhibits, some solely young people working in one medium, some, most with gun part artwork. And every time I invite lawmakers and politicians and police and fire and everyone involved that happens to see or be at a shooting, they don't always come. That time it just so happened that they did, but the challenge is getting people to buy in, and when they actually come and they see, then later I get a call or an email or whatever it is, how can I donate? How can I do this? How can I do that? So, but it's a struggle. It really is a struggle to get people to come, and then they come and they're dumbfounded by what they actually can see. So art definitely, to me, is really the segue to getting folks at the table.
And really to be inclusive and disruptive at the same time, all right?
Disruptive for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the shows have been in and around North Minneapolis or in the downtown area. You've had it at the Hennepin County Library downtown, right on Nicollet. This last show was in Edina, and it's a space that felt quite different from some of the other shows, and a crowd that was quite different from who might have shown up at some other ones. And it's about bringing this art out into the world in a way to create more space for these conversations, all right? I want to talk just a little bit about one of the pieces that I made that you're working on right now, right? So when we first started and I stood around that pile of guns down at Pillsbury United, it was a little overwhelming. These are objects that are not often in my life. I grew up in gun culture. I was a Boy Scout. We were shooting all the time. But when you see that pile of guns that came from a gun buyback, you wonder about the story behind each one of them, right? Were they handed down? Were they stolen? Were they purchased for self-defense or for some other more nefarious purpose, right? And you wonder what the stories are, but we don't know. We don't have the stories coming in with the guns, right? And the gun buyback is a powerful symbol of something. But there are 400 million guns in the US, more than one for every person alive as a citizen of this country. So we're not going to buy them all back. That's not how this is going to change, right? The gun buyback is powerful as a symbol. It's about transforming those decommissioned weapons into something that can speak to our hearts and transform us. That's where the work is, right? It's not as much in the object as it is in our own hearts and our own way of thinking. So I found this pile of guns intriguing, disturbing, hard to know what to do with it exactly. And as I was trying to imagine what to create, I was having a conversation with colleagues at my university at St. Thomas about public health and guns as a public health issue, right? And for many years, there was a prohibition against this, the Center for Disease Control studying gun violence, right? It was a politicized effort to keep that research from happening. And it's been overturned now, the research is going on. But it points to the power of that metaphor of public health for gun violence. And as I was in that conversation, I started seeing the guns as insects, as something that carried the disease of violence, right? And so disease vectors, this description is by the World Health Organization with a couple little tweaks by me. It is about very much like a mosquito carrying Lyme's disease, or a malaria, or a tick carrying Lyme's disease, right? I started seeing guns as something that carried and magnified the violence, that made it more prevalent, that made it spread through communities. And so I started looking at guns as insects, and in this case, taking the wood off of the pistol grip and making wings out of it, taking apart an umbrella to make the legs. It feels sinister to me in a way, right? And I've made several pieces like this, but I've also tried to figure out, where does the violence come from? Where is it going? How do the guns transmit the virus? And a few of my students on seeing this said, wouldn't it be even more powerful if it was a swarm? Not just the one gun, but a swarm of insects, right? And that's what you're making right now. I've worked on this with students. I've worked with it at a peace studies conference. Now here in this setting, you're creating part of that swarm, right? To talk about how the magnification of violence happens through this. Let me just say before you start worrying about it, you can either take that with you or leave it here to be part of whatever we do next. Right? So this is your creation, and whether you'd like it to be in our next exhibition or whether you'd like to take it with you as a reminder of what we're talking about today, you're welcome to do either, right? I also heard a couple of people say, oh, I'm not an artist, right? I'll do this, but I don't want you to see what I'm making. And for many of us, we might have been exploring art for a long time, but we're always wondering how we're going to do what we do and what is it going to look like and is it good enough and does it read to an audience. To the students that I work with at St. Thomas, they don't see themselves as artists. Oh no, I don't make things. I'm not going to get graded on that, am I? We get graded in class on the thinking we do, on the reflections we have, on the way it transforms us, not on the object. And the same, I think, is true for Art as My Weapon. The art that shows up is a method of getting at our purpose, right? It's a vehicle for the work that we have to do. So the object matters, but it matters as much as it changes our hearts and changes our world. So I'd encourage you to keep making as we go. And if we have a little time at the end, maybe we'll do a little show and tell as you'd like.
Does it have to be able to fly?
You know, what we've done is usually just put it on some monofilament so you can't much see it. What I did for the last show is hang them from this big number 2. You get the reference, right? The Second Amendment is something that we think of as sacrosanct, something that's at the heart of the primary document of our nation, and yet look at what harm has come, right? And we have constructed that number 2, which means we can reconstruct or deconstruct or reimagine. The Second Amendment, right? Yeah, sure. And when I've been digging into this, one of the things that art does is it gives us a chance to explore, to research, to reimagine. And I've done a bunch of reading with my students now. I had a class this semester on making art for social justice. Nikki worked with us to connect that to Art as My Weapon. And we looked at the roots of the Second Amendment, really, which came out of slave patrols and reinforcing slavery and enslavement. It came out of land theft of native communities, right? And using art as a way to try, or not art, using guns as a way to reinforce that power dynamic that led to the genocide and land theft. So the roots of the Second Amendment are really in violence, in inequality, in many of the things that echo right up to the moments we're living in terms of gun violence. We don't tend to talk about that. We talk about our rights in the moment and the individual right that's now been enshrined in the Supreme Court based on the Second Amendment. But there's so much more to explore, and the art can help us do that in a way that is still political, but it's not quite as polarizing. It's, again, that third object, that third image that helps us differently navigate that space, right? And so I'm not going to say too much about this, but structure and freedom is something we talk about a lot. And when we have lots of artists in the room, we might give a lot of freedom to explore. That's what Art as My Weapon often does. And when we have lots of people saying, oh, I'm not an artist, then we try to give you some structure, like here's a shell and here's a wire and here's an idea, right? And enough room for you to feel like, yeah, maybe I could try that. Maybe I could create something. And in this work around gun violence, trying to figure out how to structure that freedom of the Second Amendment, how to structure the freedom of our engagement with each other is part of what we're trying to do. We've tried to bring this into many different audiences. So Nikki's, as she's mentioned, worked with very small children, worked with survivors in more clinical settings. I've been working in a university setting as students try to wrestle with this issue on campus, right? And it's not, even for a campus like the University of St. Thomas, it's not far removed. A few years ago, we had a gun go off in a residence hall, and someone in the next room was shot by that gun, even though guns are banned on campus. A number of years ago, we had a student who graduated and then went down to the 3rd precinct when the protests around Jamar Clark's shooting were going on there, and he shot 4 people. One of our graduates, and it took a lot of us by surprise and made us wonder, because we assume that education matters. We assume that education is what's supposed to get us beyond some of this. And here one of our recent graduates had posted racist videos, brandishing a gun, going down to mess with a protest and ended up shooting 4 people, now in prison, and will be for years to come. So this is not far away from us. In my class this semester, I had 30 students, and 4 of them had direct ties to victims of gun violence, someone in their family who'd been shot. And one of our students, so profoundly moved by doing the art, but also still raw with the emotion of it, couldn't put her piece in the show that we did just Wednesday. It was just too close. Making the art mattered, but putting the piece out in that show was too much. Right? So this is some of the work that students did, and I'm amazed by this because, again, 30 students who mostly did not see themselves as artists. A few were amazing artists, but some of them just 5 weeks ago started imagining what could come. And they made wildly different pieces of art that reflected things like the Sacred Heart, but instead of a crown of thorns, it's a crown of shells. And really bringing that religious iconography forward. We had a student, I'm not sure where you're looking, I'll go here. We had a student who is indigenous and connected guns to her indigenous identity and history, right? And wanted to have a funeral for the tools of colonialism. We had students who wanted to sum it up very briefly and put out stickers in a way that many, many people could use and respond to. And others who are connecting things like the death of bees, of pollinators, to say there are living systems we need to respect, and there are many impacts or methods in society right now that are really degrading our life and our lived experience. I'm still processing some of what students did, and amazing to see people, again, who see themselves as non-artists, given just enough room and just enough attention on this issue to be able to create really beautiful and stirring images and objects.
I was dumbfounded by what they did. The one before on the other screen, with all of the little tweets and that so the it's like tweets from lots of people, different celebrities and different people that with opinions around different mass shootings that happened in the last, I don't know. I saw a couple on there that could have been applicable to even the Vegas incident, but that's just a small section of it. It was a whole, like, inside of a bookshelf with a plethora of tweets that we probably never saw. Me, anyways, because I don't go on Twitter. But I was just like, what? He said that? She said that? But you can go to the next, the next one, and I also this photo does it no justice, but that that is a fish tank, and the student she had been working on. I remember her working on the hands of clay. They were made of clay, and she had a whole different. She was like, "I'm gonna do all these little hands, and we're gonna do this," and this is a hand, like, with a bullet going into it, set inside of resin. And so it looks like the hand was, and then there's some sort of lighting strip on there that's activated if you get loud around it. It's crazy.
If you made a loud enough noise, it would move from blue to green to red. And so rapping on the table, almost like a gunshot, gave you the red rapid fire, right? This one, it was these 3 students created the umbrella, and hanging from the umbrella are the stories of gunshot victims. And each of them a brief story, but a QR code leading to a website that told more of their story. And it was the first thing that you encounter as you walk into the library, and really stirring. I saw people standing there for minutes and really reflecting on and reading the stories and trying to take in some of the real humanity of this beyond the numbers, beyond the politics of it, right? This one, students, most of our students are 18 to 22 years old right now in college, and they've done active shooter drills since they were in kindergarten, right? And so they had a school desk and then kids' shoes running away from the desk. And a sign, I wish I would have put the sign up too, that just said stop, like a little warning sign. And then, how will we make sure every student gets to leave this school year, right? And survives the year in school, which to me was a very disturbing measure of where we're at, right? What I'm fascinated by in this, again, is creating just enough freedom with a purpose and with activities and with a chance to think about it for these really wildly different conceptions to come out of students and to help us explore gun violence in many of its different manifestations. I think it's part of the power of art to be able to transform, to offer us the freedom to explore and to express and to encounter each other in the midst of that work.
And I got a couple new volunteers out of that class, too.
Maybe a couple of new artists, too. We'll see about that. Do you want to say a little bit more about your show?
Yeah, so Full Circle is, if you look at the photo there, each of those folks are subjects of the exhibit that are attached to what could possibly be. They're not all attached to the same shooting. However, a shooting affects tons of people. So, right, there's a shooter, and if you look to the far right, you'll see that guy right there. That's one of my subjects. His name is Bradley Sewell. He's been in prison for 20 years. He shot someone when he was 15 for no reason. Like, right now, he'll tell you right now, today, I was just mad. He challenged me, so I shot him. And, you know, I have probably 40 letters from him, and many phone visits and video visits of him, you know, telling his story and, you know, begging for help when he leaves, because he wants to become a part of the solution and not come out and be looked at as a part of the problem. So I've forged a relationship with him, a friendship, and I have been connecting him with different people in the community that can, you know, help him when he does come out. He comes out in 3 years. The guy next to him with the eyes is Mark Gorlick. He was a pediatric ER doctor for 25 years. Now he is the CEO of Children's. He has seen many children come into the hospital and just die right in front of him. He also has a book coming out that Save Our Children, I think it's called. And one of my photographs is the cover of the book. But he has a very deep passion for addressing this issue. And I actually met Bradley through him. So we all are kind of connected now. And you know, Bradley writes me all the time on my phone in the email. And I had been sick, and I was going through all kind of old lady stuff because I'm old. My bones are like, we don't want that no more. So I hadn't written him. I hadn't talked to him or any of that. And he wrote me, you know, in fear of me never talking to him again. And I said, no. That's it. We're locked in. You know, when someone needs you and they have or needs me and they have a desire to do something different, I'm there until I'm not. And so the guy in the upper left, that's Andre Locke. That's Amir Locke's father, who I've known since I was 18 years old. And so he was also in the exhibit because whether we like it or not, excessive force is gun violence when a victim, when someone is shot. The guy next to him is a very high level conceal and carry instructor. He grew up on the north side of Minneapolis. When he was young, he was ducking and dodging and decided that he wanted to learn how to teach people how to use weapons. So he's an integral part of my organization, because when I bring him in, I give him the opportunity to share with people how to properly use a weapon, and get them in the know, because a lot of people don't know, which is why a lot of the shootings that are happening in such a chaotic way, because they don't know what they're doing. And so the woman in the bottom with her, she was robbed at gunpoint, and she was also held in her home without any clothing on by the police in a raid that was not meant for her home, completely naked, traumatized by guns and the act of using a gun. So the guy that's an instructor taught her how to use a weapon, how to protect herself. She doesn't own one because she still is like not comfortable with it. But if she needed to, she would know how to protect herself with a weapon. The young guy with the locks, he was shot walking downtown, just kind of walking, going to get some pizza, got shot in some type of crossfire. And in the exhibit, there's photos of him with you can see his wounds. It went through his leg and it's just groin into his other leg, out the side. So there's two entrance and two exit wounds. He wanted to be a football player. He couldn't walk for a year. He had to learn how to walk again. So the exhibit shows all of that. And in tandem with that, there are some paintings and things that I did that relate directly to some of these people. And one of them is of Bradley. It's just kind of because he's a number to everyone else. He's not a human being. So it's just him with a number across his eyes, and a lot of the letters that he sent me, kind of little pieces of the letters that he sent me, so people could see, what someone in that position might say now, 20 years later. So I would just encourage you, if you have a second, to go there. I have received calls upon calls upon calls, emails, news people, which is what I want. I want you to go there, and I want you to see and be in shock. This is the whole point. So yeah.
And that ever-expanding sense of the exhibit itself, right? That matters. But then everybody who sees the exhibit and takes that out and tells the story, the news stories that come out, the more people who come, the invitation is to come and see, go and tell. Yeah. Right? Try to spread that word.
Yeah. And there's we're doing a panel on the 23rd there at the museum with what are they called? The Minnesota
Justice Research Center.
The Minnesota Justice Research Center, with myself, moderated by the aide to Mary Moriarty, and some other folks around the issue. So it should be a pretty good conversation if you feel like going over there.
And we know that you appreciate art, right? We walk into this space and there is hardly a blank wall, right? Or a space for one more piece. So we know that you're already convinced of that. And I think we wanted to come and say, what could it mean for gun violence, right? We're trying to do that work, but we invite you into that work as well. How can you show up as an audience? How can you show up to support? How can you bring stories like this forward to be able to help change hearts and minds to address this issue? I want to express my gratitude to Nikki McComb for all that she has done, for the space she's created for me to step in as an artist for my students, for the really powerful work that Art as My Weapon is doing in community. So, to Nikki. And I think we'd like to open it up for any questions that you have in the minutes that we have left.
I'm a poet. So when you started talking about art,
You're an artist.
yeah, and nobody thinks that. They all think visual art.
No.
In fact, I've heard people say music and art. And, okay. So I started thinking words. And then I did the other thing too, but it always startles me when words are left out.
Yeah, that's at Art is My Weapon, words are not left out because some of the artists that are working in the schools and working with young people, they're teaching literary art, so they're doing poetry, songwriting, and helping young people use their words to figure out how to talk about the issue. And I literally there just was a thing on WCCO around my programming that we're doing at URock, and their little boys were writing. They were telling stories through poetry. So I feel you. Would you like to read it? Let's go.
To believe that it's okay to have these huge things available to tear into human flesh is beyond my comprehension, humble and unlived though it may be. It tears my heart in a whole different way, and my temptation is to block it out, to not think about it or feel about it or live about it. But really, can we do that?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lux. I'm a student at the seminary. And I'm curious, when you've had those experiences where a lot of different people from many sides of the issue are in your art space together, and I'm thinking about the mayor and the chief of police and then gun advocates, and what are tools that are there tools that you've needed to find to mediate conversation well, or do you find that the art does that well itself, or is there a way that, I'm curious what conflicts arise or what miscommunications have come up that you said, oh, I need a skill to be able to have this conversation, or this is a big conversation and I want a different arena for it. And then my second question for both of you is, what more would you like to do? Would you like this to be happening more in bigger venues? Would you like different kinds of collaborators, or how can you imagine this work growing? What, if you have a vision for that? Thank you.
So to your first question, I haven't had any sort of explosive experience with those folks all in the same room. The art does work its magic with people. There have been some very specific sit-down conversations around the art that we had at the library. And in that setting, when we're actually sitting to talk for a reason and a purpose, everyone has been very respectful and, even sharing their opinions that I have not experienced. I've actually experienced more crap at the buybacks where Yeah, where, you know, it's not illegal to pull up and open your trunk and offer money for the weapons. So we would have people, you know, gun owners and gun enthusiasts come and coerce our folks that were coming to get sell their weapons to come, and they'd pay more. And there wasn't really anything we could do about it. So that's been probably the worst that's happened in since 2016. Per your second question, I'm a big thinker, and this for me, you know, I'm constantly working on with my organization in this issue, and I would like to see this exhibit with the artists that I'm working with and the work that they've created over the last, you know, however many years it is, to be in Detroit, in the inner city, at their library for a month, 2 months, in Chicago, in the neighboring cities that have even higher shooting rates than we do here, in Baltimore, in all of these places where lawmakers are not doing what they need to do. And obviously there's a cost to that. So funding is an issue. I've been doing this work, you know, and I don't much pay myself. I pay the artists to work, and I pay for the exhibits, and I do whatever I can just to get one more inch closer to that goal that I just explained.
So let's think big. How about the U.S. Capitol, right? The rotunda of the Capitol building. That'd be a great spot for an exhibit like this, right? And I do think, to your first question too, to try to create opportunities for people to engage with each other. The shows, the opening exhibits, we all have our teachings about how you show up at an art show, right? Hands behind your back, don't touch the art, wine and cheese, all that stuff, right? And it kind of creates a setting where it's pretty hard to get straight into those arguments. So there is kind of a culture and an ethic of those that I think also shape the conversations. But we had real trouble trying to figure out where on campus we were going to do this show. We had people saying, oh, I don't want to trigger people. I don't want to be too confrontational. I don't want to raise hard political issues. Even the library said, could you put some of the easier pieces out front and then put most of the pieces in the back somewhere? So just negotiating the space matters. We also had a big whiteboard right when you walked into our exhibit. And in a week, it was filled. Right? It's like a 4x4 whiteboard, and both sides of it are filled with people making comments, which we promised not to erase. And there are some up there that I would rather not see up there. But we leave them up there so that there is a sense of almost asynchronous dialogue that's happening throughout the show. There were also little slips that people could write something about and put in a box. And one of our students on campus, not in my class, created a piece of art on this little Post-it note and said on the back, would you please add this to your exhibit? Can I participate? Can I make this and put it up? So we did. We just threw it right up next to some of the other pieces. So to be thoughtful about how people are going to engage, to give them the freedom within some structure to do that well, I think that's part of our ongoing challenge, to grow into that space even better.
Is that show still up or is it down?
Yeah, the show at St. Thomas is up until next Wednesday. The show at the is up at June 1st, and then your talk again is when?
The 23rd.
The 23rd.
5:30.
And there'll be another show in Northeast Minneapolis coming up in June as well. So
At the Quorum building.
there you go. Maybe we'll send that information out as soon as we can write it down.
Thank you both so much for engaging us with this work,
Thanks for having us.
for engaging our imagination, and it's such powerful work that you all are doing, and yes, we're very grateful. We're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll be back at 10:15 to hear Dr. Joy Layden again.
Can I ask one more thing?
Of course.
Hold up what you were working on.
Okay.
Let's see what's out there. And if you'd like to contribute that toward our exhibit, toward that piece, you can feel free to leave it up here on the table. If you'd like to take it with you as a reminder or a catalyst for what comes next, please do that too.
Thank you.
All the little buggies, yes. You might want